Hi, my name's Crystal Bella. I want to talk to you about what dyspraxia is in terms of how it affects someone who has dyspraxia. I'm going to focus mostly on adults because there is an awful lot of information on young people with dyspraxia, and it's often because of the fact that there is so much information on young people, there is a lot of misinformation and misunderstanding that once a child grows into their young adult life, that their dyspraxia doesn't affect them in any way, and that it almost is perceived as if people with dyspraxia grow out of their dyspraxia. I'm just here to say now that's not true. That's not a thing that happens. A lot of people think that these kind of disorders are on a spectrum. That's also not true. It's very frustrating because there are so many people that will argue for and against it, and the truth is it depends how people cope, what support they have around them. They may appear as if they're coping, but internally there is a lot going on. Just want to get that out the way, because again, it's something that goes on into your adult life, and the way in which you struggle changes, which is why some people think that, oh, their dyspraxia got better, or they're fine with coping. It's what you need to cope with changes. If you're watching this video, chances are you already know a rough idea on what dyspraxia is. You've done your research. It is a developmental coordination disorder, which is often shortened to DCD. I personally don't like to call it a developmental coordination disorder, mostly because dyspraxia has so many more aspects than just coordination. And I think sometimes developmental coordination disorder sometimes makes people think that it's only movement based. That doesn't necessarily mean that the naming of it's wrong, it's just people's understanding of the language used for that. So to give you a better understanding of what that means, is when information goes from the brain into the body, it struggles to make sense of it. And it could be anything from a verbal instruction, it could be a physical movement, it could be a smell, a taste, a sense, so heat, temperature, that kind of thing, an understanding of social situations. So that gives you a rough idea on what that is. So it's very broad. It's not just the body's ability to make certain movements happen. That is, of course, a large aspect of it, and is often the reason that it's called clumsy child syndrome, clumsy adult syndrome, the clumsy one. Because that is a large aspect of it, but there is so much more to it. I do work quite closely with a large number of dyspraxics, and with some foundations and charities, and I get to talk to them a lot, and we share our experiences. And the one thing that they wanted Dyspraxia Awareness Week to focus on was how it affects adults. So obviously your life as an adult is so different to when you were a child. The way that you cope with certain things has to change, and sometimes when your body isn't keeping up with that information, it can be difficult. So let's start with verbal instructions. Quite often when you're in the place of work, you are sometimes briefed in the morning at the beginning of the week, and there'll be a list of things that you're instructed to do, and you have to think about what it is that you have to do for the week ahead, what you did last week or didn't do last week, in these planning. And that can sometimes be difficult because that is a lot of information that your mind is having to process, and as a processing disorder you have to do that in sections because the brain will try and do it all in one go. And if you try and do 10 different things at once, we all know that it's not going to happen. So you have to kind of adapt the way you do things so that your brain has the ability to process that information. So a case of asking employees to make minor adjustments so that your work life can become much happier, much more successful, because it does not affect in any way a person's intelligence. It does not affect in any way their ability to actually do their job. What it does affect is the way in which they need to do it. And this is all covered by a reasonable adjustment that the workplace has to provide. Definitely get to know what your rights are within the workplace because it will help you magnificently. The social side of things are very important to me, and I know that they are incredibly important to other dyspraxics as well, because a lot of people think that they're not affected socially, and they think that only autism, ADHD, and things like that are affected. You can have those along with dyspraxia, but it doesn't mean that someone who only has dyspraxia won't be affected socially, because again, it is a processing disorder. When you're in a group of people, the conversation switches, changes from person to person, and people react differently. And for someone with a processing disorder, that can be troublesome because you're having to process an awful lot of information. Things like sarcasm can be difficult. Not always understanding how to approach certain people because you're used to small groups or certain people and you're used to the way they react, but people talk very quickly, the conversation changes, and so socially that is going to be affected. There's lots of noise going on in the background, other people talking to one another, depending on what location you're in, the heat, the smells, the environment in general. For some people, what's behind me now is far too much. Whereas for others, they need that so they can focus on something visually so that their hearing can focus on what's going on. So socially, dyspraxia can definitely affect someone. It is not just autism and ADHD and other disorders that are affected socially, dyspraxia is as well. So patience is very, very important, especially in the workplace, especially if you're in retail, because you get all sorts of people coming in all the time. You're never really gonna know. I mean, you try and judge the book by its cover because in retail you have to. The whole don't judge a book by its cover thing, that doesn't exist in those situations. And being dyspraxic, we do have a very good sense of being able to do that. I'll cover that in a second. Our senses are another thing, and a lot of people only associate that with autism, but again, because this is a processing disorder, there is going to be an over and undersensitive to certain things like sound, light, temperature, visually as well. So that is really important to know, and having a space at home that is comfortable for you, that reflects those needs that you have. And this will change depending on your mood as well. Just because a certain thing is okay one day doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be okay the next day, which again, that will affect your ability to process other bits of information for work and social. So be patient with yourself is something I say, but also be patient to that person with dyspraxia, because you don't know what condition they woke up in that day. So patience is so very, very important. But it could also mean, it doesn't have to be a negative thing, you know, it doesn't have to be that they're over or undersensitive. It could be that they are perfectly on point and everything on that day is working perfectly. They're understanding things perfectly, they're processing things perfectly. And thing about dyspraxia that is massively forgotten, swept under the rug. Oh no, dyspraxic people can't do this and they can't do that, but oh my goodness, can they do certain things that they really, really enjoy? Yes, we can. We absolutely can on some days when things are kind of, you know, very pleasing in terms of sensory wise. Things just happen and can't really make sense of it, can't really say why, but they just happen and it just works, and you know, you're ahead of everyone else. And quite often that happens whilst other stuff is happening that might be perceived as negative, but there are so many positives to this, and I think you have to figure what those positives for you are and literally just work and play on them, because it will be the best thing that you do. Once you find out what that is, it can take a while, but some days those things work perfectly. Some days more than others, some not so more than others, but it does and can happen. It may take a while to find that, and you may be feeling, gosh, I'll never get to that point, it's never going to happen, can't happen, won't happen. Try really hard to kind of think it can happen or it could happen, because eventually you will get there. It's the whole, if you don't ask, you don't get kind of thing. If you don't ask yourself to have the patience and the time to do it, then it won't happen. But if you do, it will eventually happen. It may take a very long time to get there. It can happen. It is a possibility. Empathy is a huge part of dyspraxia. And often dyspraxic people are perceived as being kind of very dull, not always responsive, oversensitive, undersensitive, very similar to the way that some people with autism and ADHD might be, because I relate to those a lot because there are some things that are linked. But the reason that we may be perceived that way is because we're processing, where we're trying really hard to put those thoughts and things in boxes so that we can sift through them at a normal rate, or they're just muddled everywhere, as that is the dyspraxic brain. So sometimes the way we visually appear isn't always what people like. Some people get very upset and angry at that, and again, that is another social thing that we struggle with, is we may not always show the emotion that we're feeling because we're trying to process information and we're getting overwhelmed. We're not always aware that that's happening. Sometimes we think that we are genuinely showing how we feel, and actually we're not, because we kind of kick ourselves in the foot because we're overthinking it, and because we're trying really hard to show that emotion, it ends up not showing. Very confusing. But we have very high levels of empathy because our brains are working at 100 miles an hour. We're able to almost reflect the emotions that other people are feeling. We can understand, you know, how they're feeling. We won't necessarily always know why they're feeling it, and sometimes it may take a little while for us to get to that bit, but we understand what people are feeling, and we have the ability to put ourselves in those shoes. And that's when we then start to kind of understand why and things like that. And sometimes, you know, this has both very positive and quite negative repercussions. That sounds too intense. But obviously it means that we can connect with people, we can give them really good advice, we can, you know, make them feel listened to and heard. It's something that we crave ourselves, and so it's something we give to a lot of people. But then there is the negative side where we feel it too much and it becomes our emotion as well, because we mirror that. We feel what they're feeling, and so if someone is feeling sad and upset, then we're sad and upset, and then we've almost taken that and put it on ourselves. And obviously we haven't been in their situation, so our ability to deal with that emotion is difficult because we can't resolve it because it's not ours. It doesn't actually belong to us. So that can be a very difficult side of dyspraxia, and that's where mental health issues do tend to kick in. And you know, because we're taking emotions from other people, but also our ability to process our own informations. Again, the brain is working so quickly. We're either sieving things in boxes or they're just happening in loads of different orders. An explanation I gave the other day is, you know, thoughts do go from A to Z eventually, but you've got the rest of the alphabet, but it doesn't work in the order of the alphabet. You'll jump backwards and forwards. Things will get missed on the way. You'll focus on one aspect, so maybe someone said something, but then you almost forget about the bit where actually they reassured you, but you're focusing on those bits and going backwards and forwards. So that can sometimes be affected. It needs to be kept an eye on. Because it can really affect someone's life negatively. But again, the positive, you know, we're very open, we're very expressive and like to share things. Some people have the anxiety of sharing that because the other issue that we may have is oversharing. Many people don't appreciate that, and so the response that we might have is negative, and so some people may be scared to share what they have from fear of having those negative reactions come back. So keep an eye on your dyspraxic friends and family, because there is a lot going on in here that doesn't always get shown here or anywhere. Visual thinkers. A lot of people think that people who have different like processing disorders think in like noughts and ones, and that we're not thinking and we're very much just doing or being vacant. Again, because this is a processing disorder, things are happening at such a high pace that we're often thinking very visually on how to do stuff, because that's generally how we process information. Not everyone will be the same, so don't panic if you're watching this and thinking, I'm dyspraxic, but I don't do that. It's not abnormal in any way if you do or don't do those things. So don't worry about that. But generally we tend to be visual thinkers, which means there is the whole thinking outside the box, quite often will come up with ideas that other people just won't think about. And this is another thing that reflects back to the whole, sometimes when we get things right, we really get it right because we're thinking in an order that other people don't, because people are going from A to Z when they're thinking, but we're going, well, hold on a minute, when I get to B, what about what happens when I get to T? Because when I get to T, I then need to think about these other things, and then you kind of go, oh, I never thought about that, I'll think about this. And you know, some people won't have the whole alphabet, they'll just go A, B, C, D, done. Whereas we go, no, we have to think about everything. And again, that can be problematic, but it can also work in our favour and we come out with solutions that other people just wouldn't think of. So if you are an employer and you are a person who employs people, definitely think about people with neurological disorders such as dyspraxia, autism, ADHD, and all the other wonderful things, because the way their brain works, our brains work, is incredible. And once you make those reasonable adjustments to make things happy for us, the work that we produce can be incredible if you give us the time and patience. Please employ us. And Luna wants a job as well. See, she does. What else do we do that's wonderful, Luna? Oh, I can't remember either. There's so much. You wanna come here? You just want strips. Oh, I just remembered. Hypermobility. So many people with dyspraxia have hypermobile joints. It doesn't mean everyone will, so don't worry if you or someone you know doesn't have hypermobile joints. It's important to keep an eye on those joints because it can be an underlying cause of something else, because again, not everyone, it's not specifically a dyspraxia trait. It's not like, well, they don't have hypermobile joints, so therefore they're not dyspraxic. And it's not to say that because you have hypermobile joints, it's related to your dyspraxia. So just, you know, it could be something else. But because our joints are so flexible, I mean, you can see mine in my videos all the time. My hands are in weird shapes, and it just, I've got long limbs. I'm a long person, okay? Back to hypermobile joints. So because we are, you know, naturally, as dyspraxia is very famously known for, we are very clumsy. We walk into things, we forget to move our foot, and we trip over our own feet. Having those hypermobile joints means things are going to be bending in ways that they're not really designed to, so that can cause injuries. I sprain my wrists all the time, my ankles, my legs bend backwards instead of forward. Well, they do go forward, but they also go backwards. Things with fingers as well. So this is what's most commonly known in children, because children do it more than adults because we rely on technology now, but obviously writing, our fingers tend to hurt because those joints are kind of, you know, they're very difficult. We do the funky things with our hands. But you know, just because we have hypermobile joints doesn't mean these things don't hurt. For some people they don't, and they don't start hurting until the usual age of like 60, 70, 80. Whereas for some of us at the age of 20, we start to feel like little old grannies and everything hurts. That's when you want to look at seeing a rheumatologist, because again, there could be underlying things there. I am currently under a rheumatologist for potentially another diagnosis of something else, which is genetic, which I won't discuss yet because I haven't been diagnosed with it. But keep an eye on those joints because they could mean other things. But also, even if they don't mean that, you know, those things can start to hurt because they're moving in ways that they're not meant to, which can then cause injuries. It causes sprains. So keep an eye on those. My advice for that is to build up the strength of the muscles around the joints, because then it helps prevent the joints moving in ways that they're not really meant to. But also, sometimes life just be like that, and we're just bendy, long people. Yeah, bendy, long people. So that is dyspraxia. There is so much more that I've missed out because there is so much to it. I've done this video many times, and that's not because dyspraxia changes. Dyspraxia is always the same. I just remember things and kind of go, oh, that should be put in that video. So in the description I will have the playlist to the previous ones, and I hope that this has been some help. Please do share this video. That always really helps, because the more awareness that we have on these conditions, the more accepting workplaces will be, and the more awareness that we have, the better in general. Don't forget to check out the links below as well for my merchandise. That also really helps me. And I guess me and Luna will see you later. Bye bye, bye bye, bye bye, bye. Pretend to press the button that doesn't exist anymore. She's a baby. She's a little baby.